in Asia. Japan has had a very concerted effort with government, large operators, and industry working together to create an approach which they already have proven locally in Japan, which they are now marketing as a solution that could be easily adapted and deployed also elsewhere, which is a great opportunity.
Welcome to the Access Partnership podcast, where we explore key issues and innovations shaping the world of technology and policy. I'm Simona Lipstaite, your host for today's episode on the global telecom landscape. Our guest is Kristian Toivo, who brings deep insights into how open and disaggregated technologies are transforming the telecom sector on a global scale and driving the future of connectivity. In recent years, the open and disaggregated technology landscape has seen substantial advancements in connectivity through innovations like Open RAN and RAN Intelligent Controller, or RIC. Open RAN, about which we'll talk about, is a movement towards open, standardized radio access network interfaces. It has allowed operators to mix and match different network components from different vendors, boosting flexibility, competition, cost-effectiveness, and importantly, allowing small and medium enterprises to more actively participate in the ecosystem. And together, these technologies are helping to drive global connectivity initiatives, expanding digital access and fostering a more diversified telecom ecosystem, especially interestingly in rural and underserved areas. Our guest, Kristian Toivo, is the Executive Director of the Telecom Infra Project, or TIP, which is a collaborative effort between telecom industry leaders, operators, and developers aimed at accelerating the adoption of open and disaggregated technologies and network solutions. Kristian is leading TIP following a 30-year career at Ericsson and more recently at Atos IT Services, where he was a global client executive. So delving straight in, Kristian, welcome. And can you start us by giving an overview of TIP and its mission and the role in advancing global telecom infrastructure?
Thank you, Simona. It's great to be here. And yes, TIP is a neutral, independent trade organization, interesting for a number of members. We have about 200 organizations as members for the time being. Our mission is to drive the large-scale industrialization and take-up of open and disaggregated connectivity solutions. That's a very broad mission, and we have been getting at it from different angles. Initially, very much focused on trials, proof of concepts, but I think in today's world, it's much more moving towards how can we create the platform for industrialization that enables those expectations that you just referred to in your opening to be met. And there's one additional thing that obviously has creeped in and has a more prominent role in all this discussion, and that's the role of AI as we move towards open, disaggregated connectivity solutions.
Okay. And how specifically can technologies like Open RAN, with or without AI, help both urban and rural communities?
I think there's actually not much of a distinction because connectivity solutions, as those of us who have been part of this journey for the last 30 plus years, they have been developed with the purpose of large-scale global standards, a way of deploying wherever and in whatever conditions. That applies for today's solutions. And I think when we talk about open disaggregated, the same applies. Maybe with the addition that when we truly create that scaled open ecosystem, there will be more options, both in terms of selection of hardware and alternative providers of software solutions and maybe services on top of it, which maybe could give additional flexibility on how these solutions can be deployed in various type of, be it urban or rural or some other type of special environments like private networking solutions.
Mm-hmm. What would be the main challenges that TIP is facing? I mean, we can look at regulation, we can look at policy, we can look at maybe industry itself. How are you addressing this with the team and who are you working with to address them?
Right. No, it's a very good question. And I think my view would be that from the early years, this activity within TIP's been going for some 7-8 years. And initially, it was very much about technology. I think we are moving past the technology phase. Simple reason is that the standards that are set up now in Open RAN by O-RAN Alliance, but also in some other areas like Open Transport, Open Wi-Fi, We kind of have already proven that the technology works, and now it's more about what is necessary to create the scale and easiness of adoption. And I would say that the biggest challenge we are all dealing with this industry right now is on one hand the combination of I would say a big almost transformative change in the business environment for telecom operators. We are going from a situation that connectivity was something that was very profitable to be deployed because the need to connect people. Now, virtually, the global population is connected. Now it's more about finding business models that sustain growth and investment. And on the other hand, when you go open disaggregated, it's very much about how you deploy and operate in a way where you just don't source your solution from one single vendor or place. And this puts quite a lot of effort on the whole industry and certainly the telecom operators to transform their operation.
And I would imagine that's probably in different regions, there's different challenges or different rates of adoption. Would you be able just to give a few examples on what it is that you're doing? Because I mean, Open RAN and just open and disaggregated is a really interesting concept, but it's not necessarily one that many are familiar with in detail. So it'd be really interesting to illustrate a bit more that technology.
That's a very good question. And maybe trying to take in 3-4 different examples from around the world, I would say, and starting from where we are today in London and in Europe. One of our challenges here in Europe is that this kind of challenge to the business model and the role of operators and their ability to invest is probably at its most difficult situation in Europe. And at the same time, we would need to implement new ways of working and new technologies. So I would say the progress is not as rapid as we would have originally thought, although at the same time, the ecosystem and the industry players in Europe are well placed to kind of move forward in this transformation. Then you have the other piece, which is United States, which has kind of set up various type of mechanism to invest and foster the industry to transform itself. Maybe initially it has been more due to geopolitical competitiveness and challenges to kind of make sure that there is a trusted supply chain, but also morphing that now towards seeing the benefit of open disaggregated, and particularly the RIC that we can come back to later on as a tool for specific use cases interesting to the US government. We have, on the other hand, in Asia, Japan has had a very concerted effort with government, large operators, and industry working together to create an approach, which they already have proven locally in Japan, which they are now marketing as a solution that could be easily adapted and deployed also elsewhere, which is a great opportunity. And we see many countries, very populous countries in Southeast Asia, which are not yet there when it comes to 5G deployments, which means there's kind of a need to transform networks anyway. And there is a feeling that Open RAN in its various forms could be quite interesting in those markets. And I would round up with a final reflection on almost a continent in itself, which is India, which in my understanding sees Open RAN as a mechanism with which also to create a platform for its own industry to develop and eventually become a part of the global supply chain. So many different stances and approaches, but still moving in one common direction.
It sounds really fascinating, the breadth of the role that you're doing. I mean, it started out as, and it is still very much, a technology-driven process, but just from a policy angle, for those of us working in the policy field, there's just a wealth of different conversations you can be having, tying it to national agendas. There's, there's development, there's, as we mentioned, SME support. So really, really interesting role. Now, delving into probably the most technical bit of today's conversation, you mentioned RIC. Could you explain what that is and why that's exciting?
Yeah, the RIC, or the RAN Intelligent Controller, is a concept that is part of the Open RAN standardization or specification landscape, and it's been defined as being an operation and maintenance layer that would be horizontal in terms of using technical terminology, which means it would be a platform onto which one could add applications of various sorts developed by specialist third-party vendors, not necessarily the ones that develop the actual connectivity solutions, the radios and so forth. with the idea that through this RIC platform, one would be able to kind of isolate the vendor dependencies of individual solutions that are deployed in the networks, and then have an open ecosystem for applications, which would make it more diverse and create more innovation speed with which the automation, if you like, if I'm used that word, in terms of running and planning around the networks could be made more efficient. And obviously that's an area where AI certainly will play a big role as we move forward. Now, that platform is well defined. However, it's not a trivial implementation. And one thing to keep in mind is that the actual time spans in our industry to deploy and make changes in the networks is quite long because of depreciation periods of installed equipment. So we will, in the coming 5 to 10 years, in all major networks in the world, we will see a mix of existing traditional gear combined with Open RAN technologies, which means that in order to achieve the benefits of let's say, a common automation layer that could be fueled by RIC, there's also work to be done on how that platform of operation and maintenance can interface and operate at least on key functionalities in the what we would call legacy network components. And that's what makes it most interesting, but also challenging to get this moving forward. I'm very hopeful, actually, nevertheless, that this is the approach that the big operators are taking now that are embarking on the route with the RIC. And we certainly talk very much about that in TIP. And that's one of the key focus areas as we move forward in the next couple of years in TIP's community initiatives.
And you mentioned AI several times. For our listeners, AI is probably one of the key technologies that they're following, regardless of the sector. Sometimes it's the main driver of their technology innovation. Sometimes it's something they work with or need to keep an eye on from a regulatory perspective. How is AI, I guess, landing in telecoms, but specifically in the Telecom Infra Project or open and disaggregated work? Would you say the growth is exponential? Is it a little bit of mix and match? Are we seeing more and more of AI in your conversations, both within your industry partners, but also with policymakers, or is it a gradual increase?
Yeah, and I would say the growth of the talking is exponential, but coming from talking to doing requires hard work like any new technology, and particularly AI being as transformative as it's going to be. It will take some time, and it also takes structuring of the thinking and the thoughts. And maybe just to put it into the context, so obviously AI is being broadly used also in the telecom sector today and has been for quite some time, certainly in terms of anything related to customer service. It's been involved in operational processes. I think the big change with generative AI, which means that one can, in a simplistic, oversimplified way, enable a more natural way of communicating with the AI-driven platforms and solutions. I would say that is seemingly moving in towards the telecommunication space from two different angles. One angle, which probably has a shorter lead time, a faster route to real benefits, is the fact that telecom operators have a real role to play when it comes to offering AI services through their real estate, through their network capabilities, and certainly connectivity is always needed. So there we will see, and we're already seeing partnerships between operators and providers of AI platforms, compute resources, as well as applications. And virtually every operator are looking into this. We also have in our telco AI group within TIP, this is one of the angles we are looking at. The other one, which probably is more profound, is how does AI actually transform the way networks are going to be built, and the network service, basically the connectivity, is offered in the best possible way. And I believe there is a number of different tracks that are still to be worked out. There are very advanced thoughts. I recently read a white paper from a well-renowned lab in our industry, which was thinking of actually even letting the AI work on defining the details of the air interface. So we will kind of maybe reduce the detail of standardization to create the framework so that the actual AI agents of both sides meaning in the handset, in the terminal, as well as the network, could develop the best way of communicating with each other. I think that's absolutely possible that something like that will evolve. But I think the other piece is simply to make use of the network resources as efficiently as possible. One of the key things in all this is to figure out how do we provide the AI platform and the AI service, or actually the inference point where the AI, generative AI, will make the informed decisions or recommendations based on the data that it receives in a given moment. Right now, a lot of focus in, let's say, the whole IT industry is on training these models with these massive large data centers. It's not conceivable that for doing this inference, meaning using the AI solutions and applications, would be done in a central place where all the questions and problems would be transferred to these massive data centers. So we will see a gradual and maybe increasing acceleration of distribution of AI capabilities, which will actually bring to play the big question on what platforms will these AI agents, if I use that word, or AI applications run on. Today's connectivity platforms from the vendors that we use in all our networks are kind of closed, and it's not so easy to see how you could add generic AI services and applications to run on top of them. I believe we will see a gradual and accelerating replacement of dedicated hardware with compute platforms that will enable coexistence of AI applications with other workloads, like the workloads used for providing the actual connectivity service. This certainly is the strategy of certain vendors. It's being also driven by certain industry associations. I think it will take time because, again, the lead times in the industry are long. But I think a fundamental piece for that to happen, in my worldview, is that we need open and disaggregated implementation. So I think in my thinking, AI will be the ultimate accelerator of the move towards open and disaggregated connectivity solutions, including Open RAN, maybe in an evolved form. So obviously things will still change and evolve as we go along. I hope the listeners and viewers were able to follow this path of reasoning, but I think that's at least my view of the world.
So my key takeaway from what you said just now is AI will be definitely a driving force for open and disaggregated in the future.
I'm absolutely convinced of that.
That was a good overview. That already brought me into my last question. Where do you see the telecoms industry evolving in 5 to 10 years? So if we have the same conversation in 5 and 10 years, what do you think you will be telling us?
Probably whatever I tell is wrong, because the world and the future tends to be different than what we think. I do think what we discussed here earlier about the role of AI, we will certainly see AI used in all aspects of providing telecommunication services, both to make the organizations that are offering the services more efficient, but we will of course then see various levels in 5 years, maybe in 10 years for sure, of, I would say, AI native connectivity solutions, AI native radio networks, which kind of makes use of AI's capabilities to optimize the way the service is delivered. So I think that there's no doubt we are moving in that direction. But I think there will also be changes which are kind of less technical in nature, but more related to what we talked about earlier when we talked about the challenges with Open RAN and open and disaggregated. How do you operate in the best way in such an environment? Partly it's a matter of business models. Where's the value that is being provided? If connectivity in itself becomes a just basic capability that everybody has to have, in order to invest, build, and run these networks, one obviously have to be part of those money flows and business models that are related to the AI services that provide value to end users, enterprises, or consumers. And I think telecom operators are certainly working on figuring out their role in that. I believe there will also be alternative models on offering the different levels of connectivity. We already today see the increasing role of tower companies, providing the real estate, providing the capability to kind of make sure the connectivity and coverage is there for everybody. I could foresee that at least in some regions and in some instances, these providers of that infrastructure will have a larger share, including providing more and owning more of that connectivity technology, not just the sites and the towers, if you like. That could happen. That would mean that certain operators would maybe evolve to be more providers of the actual service and owning the end customers rather than owning all that infrastructure. I think we will also see operators who embrace the whole chain, and there are some of them already in the world, in Asia particularly, who kind of control it all, partly because maybe cultural reasons, they are trusted, they are present in their markets, partly maybe also regulatory support and guidance on how to secure that there are domestic large players that can ensure that the scope, and particularly now considering AI, is within, let's say, the framework that is relevant for those regions. And then there might be anything in between in those mixes. So I will look with quite big interest on how this all will evolve. And I think it's going to be less of a technology play and more an operational, regulatory, and policy play. And coming back to the earlier questions, which I didn't so fully go into regarding policy, I think policy plays a big role in terms of how, in different parts of the world, one wants to put its position as a nation or as a region in this space. And that partly depends maybe on the assets and the organizations and the kind of, call it crown jewels that are existing in certain regions. But I would also kind of encourage anybody to look at maybe starting from the end in mind. If the world is about AI services used broadly in society, in business, what are the ways for any region, country, nation to make sure that there's both a reasonable kind of control and guardrails, but also possibilities for the local industry to develop capabilities. And in some cases, those new capabilities might be more important than some of the existing capabilities that we maybe want to protect and try to secure. Very interesting times for policymakers, and certainly a role for Access Partnership to be there to kind of foster the conversation. And certainly Telecom Infra Project, or TIP, will continue to provide like a convening function for folks that want to talk about these topics in a broad sense.
Indeed, very, very interesting times for the technology and the policy. So thank you so much, Kristian, for the insightful discussion. And it was very good to hear a little bit more insight into what open and disaggregated technologies, now with AI, can bring to the telecom industry. At Access Partnership, we are committed to critical discussions on innovative technologies and a more connected future world. So the conversations like with Kristian are critical to advancing the understanding and advancing the changes shaping the world. Thank you for our listeners for joining today's conversation. Please don't forget to subscribe to the Access Partnership podcast if you want to hear more discussions about connectivity and other types of technologies and policies. And until next time.